3 days. I've been in bed basically since Thursday. I've been sick. I had just like a flu, kind of right on Thanksgiving. Thursday was the worst day. I literally spent the whole day just kind of like feverish. I didn't have any food. Everything was closed. I was eating turkey burgers and listening to Ric Flair. There's like an 8-hour long like career shoot interview with Ric Flair. And literally the whole day I just was like going in and out of like fever dream consciousness, Ric Flair. You know, just spitting, chewing tobacco into a Aquafina bottle, and just going off about his long and illustrious career. And then Friday and Saturday, same deal, basically. I mean, Friday I felt a little better. Saturday, I felt better. Today I feel basically fine, but I've got some kind of weird ear fucking thing. Now I feel like I've got some kind of obstruction, or I don't think it's an infection. I think there's just built up mucus or something, my sinuses. So I missed the whole fucking... To be honest, I just kind of needed a break. I mean, I haven't gotten sick, really, since before the pandemic, hardly at all. I got sick in, like, May. So this is really only, like, the second or third time I've been sick since the beginning of the pandemic. And I don't know. I was kind of throwing caution to the wind in a certain way. Well, I just kind of knew... I assume doing, like, this open mic that I'm doing an open mic every Monday where I'm hosting 25, 30, 40 people sharing a microphone. I need to figure out some kind of, like, wipe situation for that. But I just assumed I will probably get sick at some point this winter. And so a part of me was like, well, let me just... I already thought I was sick. I thought I had gotten sick on Monday, because when I woke up Tuesday... I had kind of a fever, or maybe, I guess that was Wednesday. I had kind of a fever, and I spent the whole day... Well, first I walked uptown to meet my guy, who didn't really have a great set up for me, but whatever. And then, so what happened was, how I got sick, okay? I'm pretty sure this is what happened, is, God, what did I do on Tuesday? Did I have something going on Tuesday? Let me check my calendar real fast. So, Wednesday, so I go uptown. I don't know what I did. And then, on the way home, I thought, I've been trying to do 15 shows a month. And so I needed to do 4 shows before the end of the month, on top of, I've got a System Lord tonight and the open mic tomorrow. So I needed to do 4 more shows to hit 15. So I was just trying to do as many shows as I could. That was my plan for Thanksgiving. I was going to go out, yesterday, or Friday, and do a couple shows. Going to go out yesterday, going to go out today. I didn't do shit. I guess I just needed a break. I have been going pretty hard and been around a lot of people. But I did let my guard down in kind of a stupid way. So what happened was, I went to this open mic at Producers Club, which I like because it's very low pressure. And, there's usually not that many people there. It's in Midtown. I like performing near Times Square. It makes my life seem exciting. And it's just a good place to bomb. I mentioned that in my book, how the Producers Club is a great place to bomb. Which I'm kind of at that stage where I'm doing experimental stuff, so I like to go to these kind of off-site kind of interesting rooms to perform in, where I can just sort of quietly try stuff. So anyway, I go to this open mic, and like a lot of these fucking open mics, the vibe is just weird. Like these comedians are wildly uncalibrated, and they make jokes that are just like completely insane to the average person, but to them, I don't know, they just somehow they feel licensed to do this, or they feel like it's funny, or they just have no control. So I go to this open mic. And the vibe of the thing is weird because like they're kind of being nice to me and kind of like they're going out of their way to like, because I was clearly like this new person that had showed up, and like, these open mics, it's like a lot of times it's like 8 comedians that are the same people that do it every week, and like it costs $5 to do it. So they want new customers, they want new people to come in and like pay. It's pay to play. It's $5 for 5 minutes. That's one reason why I feel like I can do whatever I want up there, because I'm buying the stage time. So in a certain way, you're not obligated to entertain anybody. You're paying for yourself to just enjoy yourself. So anyway, I think during my first set, there was like these people in the theater who were all comedians. I all kind of recognized them because I've done Producers Club a few times. It's kind of the place I feel safest doing the comedy shit, just because it's like under the radar a little bit. So anyway, there's all these people, and then they're gonna go do a rehearsal or something, but they're like, let's get this guy up to do some stand-up. You want to go? They like make it a point to put me up there to like, I don't know, to go out of their way to give me a good experience or something, because like like I said, I'm just this kind of stranger that came to like ow. See, I've got like this every time it like hits the nerve or something. And so I literally wasn't prepared. I didn't prepare anything. I literally stopped in there on my way back from uptown, and I didn't even know what the fuck I was going to talk about. I was hoping to go like 6th or 7th to let the other comedians go up, and then I could sort of think of what I was saying. But the guy's just like, you want to go up? Why don't you go up? And so I get up there, and I don't even remember what the fuck I said. I bombed big time because I just wasn't prepared at all. And then it was weird because then like literally all those people left the room to go to their rehearsal or whatever the fuck it was they were doing. And then a whole new open mic came in. So it was just very weird. So I signed up for that one real fast, and I got on, well, it was just, that one was like a little more informal. I think it was the same guy that was hosting it maybe or something. It was just weird. It was like, I couldn't tell if it was like officially an open mic or if it was just like a bunch of comedians hanging out in a room that had like a microphone and a stage. Because like one comedian came in and he just went up and started talking into the microphone. And it's like, we weren't even in the middle of a show. He just like started doing material or just talking in the microphone sort of like before the show was going to start. So it was like, technically, you're supposed to pay $5 to do it, but I somehow skirted through without paying for either. I did 2 sets, so I did a 5-minute, and then there was, like I said, like everybody left, and a new open mic came in like real quick, and then a few more comedians went up, like 2 or 3 comedians were signed up for that one. And I was, one of the only other people in the theater. And one of the comedians like turned around and was like, you want to go? And I was like, yeah, I'll go. So I got up and did it again, which I think the guy that hosted the open mic was kind of pissed about because he was like, you win already. But it was a whole different open mic. It was a whole different group of people. I just didn't understand like what the show setup was or what the schedule was or anything. It just seemed... So anyway, I go up a second time, and like I said, I kind of thought I was sick because I had woken up that early with like fever and just like you know, tired, whatever. I thought I was sick. And so, like, you know, I can't think of anything. I'm up on stage. I'm like trying to improvise. It was terrible. It was probably the worst set I've ever done. But who cares? It didn't matter. I did 2 shows, you know? That was the point, was getting the reps in. So, like, as my fucking time is running out, I have like a minute left or whatever. There was just a weird... the one guy between the 2 kind of like open mics, the guy who was hosting it was talking to this other guy who was like another host, and he was like, "Fuck Palestine." He said it really loud, and he said it kind of like in a daring, like he thought it was funny, but like there was just a weird kind of like almost like Zionist energy in the air. Like, obviously, a lot of my best friends are Jewish, and I love the Jewish people, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't have, you know, but it's just weird when it gets to be like real pro-Israel. And the guy's like, "Fuck Palestine." And the other comedian's like, "Well, you better watch out. You know, like, you're going to get bombed." Or I forget what the guy said, but it was something like, you know, be careful, you know, be careful what you say, because you say that in front of the wrong people. And, like, you know, I'm a pretty tolerant person, let's say. Maybe perhaps too tolerant. But I'm just kind of sitting there just trying to figure out what the vibe is. I'm just like, this guy's like, I don't know. He probably lived in Israel, or is he Israeli, or is he, you know, like, there is a strong element of that in New York City. I'm not, like, criticizing it. I'm not, but there is, like, there is a strong element of that in New York City. People who are, like, very pro-Israel. Just gonna say. And maybe this open mic is, like, a hotbed of that activity. So, anyway, so that happened between the sets. I'm like, that's kind of weird. Whatever. And so, it's my last minute. You know, they're giving me the light, and the guy's like, well, he's kind of nagging me when I went up there. He's like, "I'll give you 3 minutes." Because I had gone up once before. And he's like, "I'll give you 3 minutes." And then so I'm kind of bombing, and he's like, "I'll give you 8 minutes if you say the N-word." Which, like, I don't know why that was funny to these guys, but, like, that was what they were trying to get me to do for the last minute. They were like, "Say the N-word. Why don't you want to say the N-word?" And, like, you know, there was, like, a couple of black guys at the open mic, so it wasn't, like, it didn't seem, you know, like, in the fucking, Now, don't get me wrong. In no way, shape, or form was I gonna say the fucking N-word. And I didn't, and, like, I didn't think it was funny, really, or anything, but, like, that's what I mean. It's just, like, this comedy world is just, like, so wildly, calibrated. Like, that in that room, they think that's appropriate. They were sort of... that was the joke, I guess, to them, is they were, like, egging me on, or, like, goading me on to say this thing. Maybe knowing that I wasn't gonna say it, or the guy's like, I'll give you 3 more minutes if you say the N-word. I don't know why they were trying to, like, provoke this. But I have no desire. I don't know what people's, you know, particularly white people's fascination would be with saying this word. To me, you don't say it, period. It's that simple. And that's not a, you know, what's hard about that? You know, it's a horrible word. Just don't say it, period. It's not difficult. You know, but some white people just make it like, why can't we? It's just ridiculous. But I forget, but they were trying to get me to say it for some reason. It felt like school children or something. I mean, it wasn't like, it wasn't as like, like, it wasn't as bad as it wasn't like as violent or as like in the spirit of comedy. It was more like in that place. It was more like, come on, just say, it wasn't like some fucking, it wasn't like Roots or some good old boys were like, say it was like they were playing it like it was a joke, and to me it was not cool that they were like making that joke, but like I also like I wasn't gonna say it, so I wasn't feeling like I was complicit in that. And then the guy's like, say KYKE, because he's Jewish. I think he was testing me, trying to, oh, well, you won't say the N word, but you'll say the K word. And I wouldn't say that either. And so I ended my set. The guy's like, we'll give you, he's like, if you say it, you won't have to pay. Or we'll give you a minute for every like letter in the word you pronounce or something, he said. And so I ended my set and I was like, no way. You'll never make a racist out of me. Let it be known here today. Let the record show that I would not be made into a racist. I am not a racist. And that's how I went out on my set. It was just weird. It was just a weird, it wasn't like the most unfunny. It wasn't funny, but if it was it wasn't funny. But like, just like those guys, for whatever reason, it felt like that was just the level that they. It was just weird because the one guy who hosts the open mic so afterwards, I stepped outside to smoke a joint with these guys, and I think that's where I got sick. Not those, not the guy who was trying to get me to say the N word. Like I said, it seemed like some kind of more like inappropriate comedy thing than any kind of like, I don't know. Like sort of a more old school before, like these guys are canceled probably, or like they probably have a lot of material or feelings about cancel culture and blah, 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 and how it's against them and how it's stupid or whatever. But anyway, so the one guy who's like the actual host guy seems pretty smart. I've seen him do stand-up a few times, and I'm like, this guy's pretty thoughtful. Like, he's not like, I don't think he's like, I don't know. Who the fuck knows? So anyway, I don't know these people at all. I was just trying to do my 5 minutes, and I just wanted to get the fuck out of there without having to pay anything, which I did. But I guess I paid a bigger price because, so I go out front, and, these comedians, maybe it's because they're racists. Maybe it's because they're racist, Zionists or whatever. Maybe they just don't have a lot of friends or people who are willing to tolerate them at this point, but they're very accepting of me. The comedians are like very welcoming. Everybody at this, maybe not the host guys, but the other comedians and stuff were all super nice. They all like said hello. They had even though I bombed horribly both times, some of them actually had some nice things to say, which was kind of shocking. Because I really just was bad. I didn't say anything interesting. I was all over the place. It was just weird and bad. So, but anyway, like, these guys are like, hey, you want to smoke a joint with us? I'm like, fuck, yeah, sure, okay. I had an ounce of weed in my pocket from what I had bought. But these guys had, like, a big, pre-roll, so I'm like, okay, cool, And, like, I thought I was getting sick anyway. Like I said, I'd woken up that day, I had a fever, this and that. So I was like, what difference does it make? I'm already sick. Let me share a joint with these guys. Get them sick. No, I wasn't trying to get them sick. I wasn't sure. You know, I was like, am I sick? Am I not sick? So anyway, this one guy's super nice. This other guy who had done some comedy right before me, he was like talking about how he was like, you sound like a professor up there, man. I felt like I was getting like you know, like a lesson or something. I don't know. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But like this new, so my dealer guy, I've been getting 2 ounces of this guava gelati, which has really just been perfect. It's really been perfect for $150. And so I text him. He's like, I don't have that anymore. I'll sell you Sour D an ounce for $100. So that's what I got. And it's not as good at all. And it costs more. So that sucked. So I'm also like, let me smoke weed with these guys because they have some kind of superpower, Jay. Like, this will get me higher than this fucking shitty weed that this guy just sold me. And, so anyway, I'm also just like, I want to bond with the comedians. I want to spend time with them. They're being welcoming to me. They're being open to me. They're talking to me. Like, why the fuck not? Why not just like go share a joint with these guys and just try and like get to know them a little better? You know, that's the point of going to all these open mics and shit. The one guy, like I said, the one guy was not out front. The guy who was trying to get me to say the N-word. And like I said, he just seemed like a bad comedian more than like some kind of violent racist or something. But who the fuck knows? An irresponsible comedian. A lot of these comedians are irresponsible. They don't know. They're just immature. That's why they get into comedy. They don't have anything to fucking say. Some of them do. But anyway, we're sharing a joint. This guy's telling me about how he was a con artist. I think he said he dropped out of high school and something. He worked on Wall Street, and then he like, I forget. Something about, you know, that should have been a red flag right there. There are a number of red flags. I mean, the devil always wants to be friends. It's always people that, like, have bad intentions that are really trying to be super friendly to you and welcome you in, like Christians or something. At one point during one of the guys' sets, they did get into an interesting thing about Christian conservatives believe like 2/3 of the Jews are going to get killed before the apocalypse. And then the guys were like, that was the Holocaust. And then the other guy's like, it's not the... I forget what he called it. They were using like Hebrew. You know, they were using like Yiddish fucking words and shit, you know. The Shlomecha is not here yet. You know, shit like that. Or whatever the fuck it is. The Messiah is not here yet. You know, it was like very Jewish. Which, like I said, I don't have a problem. I love Jewish people, obviously. But I think at a certain point it tips over into being like Netanyahu and shit. And that's when shit's like, okay, I'm not pro-Israel, really. The fucking genocidal police, military state. But you, like I said, you find a lot of that energy in New York City, especially. There's a lot of transaction between the two. And it's a touchy thing, right? Like, you can't really criticize it either. Because then they're going to blackball you at the open mic. You're not going to be performing at the Producers Club anytime soon. Maybe my next set I'll go... talk about Israel. The comedian before me was this girl who was so hot. I couldn't even stand it. And she was super Jewish. Not that I mean, not to profile anybody that way. I don't mean to. I apologize, but she was like, I'm way funnier when I just am freewheeling. Or so. Does anybody have a? Can I get a suggestion from the audience of a topic? And of course, somebody goes abortion. I should have yelled Israel. Netanyahu. Palestine. Fuck Palestine. They should just call it the Fuck Palestine open mic. Producers Club, Fuck Palestine open mic. 5 minutes if you talk shit about Palestine during your act. So anyway, the guy's telling me about how he's a con man, and we're passing the joint around. The other guy's really nice. The other comedian guy's like super fucking cool and like, this is one thing that I like about comedy world is everybody smokes weed. And it's a big part of their act. Everybody's like very open about it. In poetry, as far as I know, nobody smokes weed. I'm the only poetry guy that's like chugging joints, as far as I know. It's just a shame. I mean, comedians, it's just rampant. Everybody's smoking, everybody's high. I think that's beautiful. I wish the poets would get on that level. Jesus Christ. So anyway, as we're passing this joint around, I sort of hear this guy's like, he's like sniffling a little bit. You can tell he's like stopped up, but just like, and so I'm like, I have a moment of like, oh man, is this guy sick? But it's just I've been careful for so long, and like, I don't typically share joints with people. It's something I've been doing now and then recently, maybe once every few weeks or something. I should have been smarter about it. But to be honest, it was almost, and maybe this is really stupid and misguided, but it was almost like a preemptive, like, let me just get sick now so I can like build my immune system. So that way for the rest of the winter, I like won't get sick. I don't really know if that's how it works, but that was sort of the misguided, oh God, my ear, ow. I was, there's been all these things in the past few days about ear stuff. During these Ric Flair shooter interviews, Ric Flair was talking about at one point he had like a little piece of bone stuck in his ear or something, like a piece of his eardrum, and so he got like vertigo or some shit. And then Bob Dylan had this fucking status update the other day. Yeah, Bob Dylan had a status update about there's this auto signature controversy. Which, like, people are super pissed at Bob because he used this auto signature thing to autograph his fucking books. And so he actually made, like, a social media status update about this. I think Bob is, like, coming out of the closet as, like, a he, like, his book is, like, full of, like, references to, like, modern shit. Like, TikTok and shit. Like, Bob Dylan, I think, is on everything. He's probably on Instagram. He's probably on YouTube constantly. And he's probably on Facebook. I mean, he's definitely on Facebook because it looked like he wrote this fucking thing himself. And it was very apologetic. You know, you could tell he felt bad that he had tarnished his word or whatever by sort of being, not that he was disingenuous, but like the people did feel ripped off or something, like they'd been lied to. And so I do think he made it a point to come out and, you know, explain how he had made the mistake. And so he said that in 2019 he got really bad vertigo. And he said it continued through the pandemic years. And he needs a team of 5 people working in extremely close quarters with him to make the autograph signing sessions possible. Which I'm just trying to picture that. Like, Bob's got like 5 people doing what exactly? Like, you know, holding him up in the air or something? I mean, what the fuck? 5 people helping you sign autographs. That sounds kind of intense. And like, Jesus Christ, like, Bob has done some of the best work of his entire career in the past 3 years. To think that he's been doing that with like vertigo is kind of nuts. But this is something that you see with wrestlers all the fucking time, is like playing injured, playing hurt. You know, they have concussions. So, you know, I'm sure they just walk through life in pain and have all kind of weird head trauma, and their backs hurt, their joints hurt, this, that, the other. So Bob, it's like, he's got vertigo, he's playing injured, he's on tour right fucking now with vertigo. So I think in some ways, I don't typically have, I mean, I have ear wax problems. Doctors are always telling me there's like a shitload of wax in my ears. I don't use Q-tips, so I don't know how to get wax out of my ears. Apparently you're not supposed to use Q-tips, so how the fuck are you supposed to get wax out of your ears? I don't know. But, I don't typically have, like, or I haven't had, you know, really, like, ear sickness since I was, like, a child, really, you know, knock wood. So, I don't know. I don't know how this happened. I think there's just literally something, like, I need to get some peroxide in one of those bulb things. I've got a gig tonight, a gig tomorrow night. I'm shooting Tuesday and Wednesday. So I have to work the next 4 days. Even though, you know, I basically spent the last 3 days in this very spot right here in bed. I'm also sort of just like trying to prepare for the winter kind of like season, you know. It felt like I probably needed a break. I mean, the weather, it just changes everything, you know. It's no longer possible to just walk around everywhere, going to all these fucking shows and sitting in the park. It's like, plus I'm probably, I don't know what the fuck is gonna happen. I need to find a job, among other things. So, I don't know. It's like, I've had pretty comfortable time the last couple years. I wish it would just continue forever. I was watching these fucking... So, I basically spent the last 3 days either watching, like, wrestling shoot videos, wrestling videos, or like, I've also been watching audio commentary tracks from movies, which are on YouTube. A lot of the commentary, not the movie itself, but you can watch the commentary track, which I find is actually just as good. You know, I think to some degree, the shoot interviews are really just storytelling. They're just painting the picture. You know, they'll sit down with the Dusty Rhodes or, like I said, a Ric Flair, and they'll just sort of go through the story of their career, all these different eras. You know, I think, once again, wrestling being sort of a metaphor for an artistic career or a show business career, an entertainment career, whatever it is, stand-up comedy, poetry, whatever it may be, wrestling is sort of a metaphor, or it's a system through which you can kind of understand your own thing by going, oh, and well, in wrestling, it's just like for its own like habitat and like culture, it's incredibly mapped out, and I think the other forms could absolutely learn. You know, like these shoot interviews. I can't think of another field where they do that. I mean, I suppose maybe other sports, or you know, like there's certainly like a lot of self-chronicling going on in like the movies or this or that music, but like literally they'll just sit down Vader in front of a fucking video camera and he'll talk for 4 hours about his whole fucking career, who he trained with, going to Japan, his time in WCW, his time, you know, whatever it is. This fucking incident with Shawn Michaels, fighting Hulk, you know, all of the little notable kind of like summits and crests and nadirs of his career, they go into. And you know, I don't think that's exclusive to wrestling, but I think wrestling is kind of maybe the most interesting or obvious place where there's this sort of straddling between. In wrestling, it's sort of acknowledged, I suppose, the straddling between the kayfabe and the shoot, the work and the shoot. You know, like they use what's real. And the shoot interviews are an interesting aspect of that, where the wrestler sort of gets to tell their own oral history, their own point of view, their own side of the story. But it really is almost an exhaustive literary genre at this point. I don't know if you could call it literary, but for my purposes, I find it interesting to view in those terms, because Eric Bischoff has a fucking podcast. Kevin Nash has a fucking podcast. Ric Flair's got a goddamn podcast. Fucking Cornette's got a podcast. Stone Cold Steve Austin's got a, you know, at a certain point, maybe not every wrestler has a podcast, but a lot of them do. And I think at this point, almost all of them do shoot interviews to some degree. Or at least now, I think the internet definitely gives a venue for that stuff. These things probably used to be traded like on tapes and shit, you know, so they weren't probably as widely like produced, right? Like, not, I mean, obviously the expense and the ubiquity of the equipment has changed a lot too and improved. And so you know, in the 80s, it wasn't like they were having every fucking jobber dickhead doing a shoot interview. Whereas now it's like anybody can get on YouTube and post, you know, Canyon can tell his side of the story, whatever it is. You know, this fucking Bischoff podcast, it's like they talk about every pay-per-view. They talk about the Cornette one is the same thing. I would say the Cornette podcast is the crown jewel. He's like the Proust of wrestling. I mean, Cornette is endlessly entertaining, creative, intelligent, brilliant, as a talker, as a storyteller, as a character, as a personality, as a voice, as a on the mic kind of guy. And I don't know, but I think there is something different about wrestling that, like, the stories just seem endless. Like every fucking, you know, when Cornette fell off the scaffold, or when, you know, what are Cornette's thoughts on the Owen Hart thing? What are, you know, fucking Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair cage matches from the 80s? Ric Flair versus Steamboat. You know, the Flair interviews are fucking... He's not, you know, for being so good on the mic, he's surprisingly not really forthcoming with the shoot interviews. He's pretty reticent, and he's really not that entertaining. He's just kind of like a guy. You know, he's not really like a storyteller per se. You can tell the Ric Flair thing is like something he can kind of turn on, but like, you know, there's a lot of good information in this shoot interview, but it's not like listen to Cornette where the dude will just like, he's more of a verbal artist. And you can, I think it's something, you know, Cornette's from Louisville or something. He's from the South. Listening to him really, and this is just an aspect of wrestling or certain types of wrestling in general. It feels very Southern. Maybe that's not a good thing, but listening to Cornette's sort of turns of phrase, he's got a million fucking, you know, like ways of putting things, like kind of utilitarian, local color. What's the but it's like, you know, I can't think of a, you know, like Poetry World. There's, as far as I know, there is not really, I mean, there's books and things where there's interviews and there's sort of like poets' memoirs, this, that, but like, they should do shoot interviews for everything. Just like sit a guy in front of a fucking camera. Part of what is cool about the shoot interviews is they are like raw and unedited. They're like demo tapes. They're not like high production value. They feel like underground shit. They feel like snuff films or something almost. I mean, not the way that, you know, obviously not the content, but like the way that they're shot and stuff feels kind of like gritty and like no budget, kind of feels seedy a little bit. In a way that I think is kind of, it's kind of outlaw, it's kind of cool, it's kind of rebel. It's more rebel, it's more outlaw, it's more underground. That's something, that Alex Jones interview that the guy on Channel 5 did is absolutely insane. That's one of the things he says. You know, they're criticizing, or they're saying, like, what's it going to be like now that, you know, you've been banned from YouTube or whatever the fuck. And he's like, it's more outlaw, it's more rebel, it's more underground. You know, makes it more badass. That's one way to brand it. The shoot interviews feel that way, the way that they're shot, and the wrestlers sort of off the cuff. It's an interesting kind of mirror or inversion of the promo, right? Because a promo is a work. It's made up, but it's sort of playing on things that like the shoot interview might deal with. You know, the promo might use real life stuff. You know, Shawn Michaels calling Ric Flair old yeller. He's too old. You know, that's a real life issue for Ric Flair. He doesn't want to give up. He doesn't want to let go. He doesn't want to retire. He'll never retire, he said. So they just write that in the storyline, write that in the promo. But it's a work. It's not a shoot. Work meaning it is fake. Or it's something they agree upon. Whereas like a shoot, it's like, that's where you tell the behind the scenes story of the same thing. And sort of you'll go into more detail. You'll talk about what you really think of the other guy. You know, oh, Vader was hard to work with. He was a stiff worker. You know, Shawn Michaels was a dickhead. Bret Hart's whiny. Bischoff doesn't know anything about wrestling. He's just an executive. Flair's, what, a drunk. Pat Patterson. I gotta say, of all the wrestling shit I've been watching, my favorite stuff is the WWF stuff right from before Hulk Hogan. Like the early 80s WWF stuff. I don't know, there's something about the vibe. The lighting is really good. It's dimmer. They're only using like overhead lights, so there's a lot more like shadow and like chiaroscuro. And like the thing about the WWF wrestling from right, I do think that there's truth to the idea that McMahon kind of killed wrestling actually. Because if you watch wrestling before Hogan era, there's gimmicks and shit here and there, but like it's not all about that. And it's not like a fucking, it's not like a bunch of children's clowns or something. Whereas like once Hogan came in, and you know, when I watched wrestling when I was like a baby, you know, it was Macho Man and it was Brutus Beefcake and, you know, Big Boss Man and the Honky Tonk Man and all these cartoon characters. And as a small child, they were clowns, you know, it was, and like that was what appealed to you. But like now I'm an adult. I want to watch adult wrestling for adult people, not a bunch of children's fucking entertainers on fucking steroids. And so the vibe of the WWF, there was a little of that, you know, like Sergeant Slaughter's there, or Jimmy Snuka has a little bit of a gimmick. But there's also like Bob Backlund or like Kurt Hennig is in a lot of these matches. You know, the gimmicks that are there, they don't go really overboard with it. Like it's fucking Yokozuna or some shit. Or the you know, like there's a little bit of that. But it's like, it's not, it's a little more exciting than some of the like Southern wrestling I've seen. Like I've watched some of that NWA stuff from the 80s. I watched a lot of Flair stuff. I watched Flair Steamboat, the trilogy. I watched Shawn Michaels' retirement match with Flair. So the WWE, or the WWF, before Vince McMahon Jr. bought it and brought Hogan in and all that, it's not as Southern feeling. I mean, because it's still New York, it's Madison Square Garden. It's got it's not, I don't know, the Southern wrestling feels a little bit more like it's about holds. The gimmicks are a little more like, it's just these big hillbilly dudes, right? And I'm not against big hillbilly dudes, but like watching a bunch of big hillbilly dudes like do arm wrenches and like wrist locks and like, I don't know. I haven't quite, there's something about the WWF wrestling. Like I watched, there was this match, it was an alley fight with Pat Patterson and Sergeant Slaughter from 81 in Madison Square Garden. I think it was match of the year. And it's an interesting match because there's a lot of action in it, but it's very different than the wrestling that I saw like in the 90s, let's say. It's way more, not like sloppy, but like it's not as like, with the 90s wrestling, it's like you felt like when they were executing moves, there was like this like deliberate sequencing and shit that was like very clear cut, and like you have to set the move and then do the move. This alley fight, it's like there was way more kind of like selling. There was way more kind of like blur or like I don't know. It was way more about like the passion of the strikes and stuff, and you know, punching somebody had way more of an implication than it would later. You know, when those guys were actually, when they were punching each other, it felt more like, okay, they're playing it like they're actual punches, not just like fake like wrestling punches, which is how it became later. It became later just like guys could kick out of anything. The moves became like superhero fucking moves and shit. And I like, you know, this is something Cornette goes on and on about. Is just like, does anybody care about fucking wrestling? I'm gonna talk about wrestling for 2 fucking hours. You know, he talks about gymnastics. It became all about gymnastics and like doing way too many moves. Like you don't want to overperform. The territories, these guys had to keep making money. You know, they had to draw the same audience back for years and years and years. So they had to put on matches that like created a standard that they could meet and sustain. Whereas later, guys would come in and just put on these kind of, I mean, if you look at like Hardy Boys style matches or like these table ladder and chair matches or like a lot of the ECW stuff, right? It's like, it's hot spots, high spots. It's less about the kind of face heel dynamic and like getting the audience to really want to see one person get their ass kicked. And like have long, kind of slower 90-minute Broadways. It's what Flair keeps talking about. It. Wrestling for an hour every night. Guys can't do that anymore. They'll have a 10-minute match or a 15-minute 5-star match. They can't wrestle for an hour draw, which is a Broadway. Or a 2 out of 3 falls match. Flair could wrestle for an hour every night. One of the things I also find interesting about our culture and wrestling's place in it, it's a bigger part of our culture than people realize. And, or maybe they do realize, but the face and heel dynamic, the way that it's shifted over the last 40, 50 years. And it seemed like people used to, you know, like when I was a kid, you liked Hulk Hogan. He was the good guy. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins. You know, he's a real American. He's honest, he's hardworking, whatever bullshit, you know. You want to root for that, you want to cheer for that guy. Those values. Although I don't, what would I say Hulk Hogan represents? Say your prayers and eat your vitamins. Is that like a religious thing? Is that like a fitness thing? That's like a, I mean, obviously the flag and being an American. Fight for the rights of every man, not necessarily gender inclusive there. The real American Hulk Hogan. So he's going to fight for the rights of every man. War, that's a big part of Hogan, supporting the war machine. Hulk Hogan. But in the 90s, something changed where people started to want to root for the bad guy. The bad guys became cool. The heels became cool. I guess Hogan was probably the beginning of that, too. The NWO, his heel turn kind of initiated that whole thing. And then the Attitude Era was kind of the same fucking deal where The Rock was cool. Stone Cold Steve Austin was cool. These kind of badass outlaw, like I was saying. More rebel. Outlaw. and you know, you see that in like reality shows, right? A lot of the times the breakout stars, the people who get all the attention. I mean, look at Trump, right? Trump's the ultimate monster of that, is like the heel who people root for, you know, the bad guy. But reality shows, right? It's like Johnny Fairplay. It's all the people who like cheat, became the winners in our society. God damn it. You know, there's nothing to be said really for doing things honorably or not cheating or, you know, I think that's like a Reagan, you know. Reagan, they initiated this kind of politics of hating the government, hating the idea that like America could be like a good place or a helpful place in any other way than like just like this big security war machine weapon state. It's all about business, making money at all costs, privatization, no regulation, you know, break whatever rules you can. The capitalists, the super capitalists, like McMahon. This is another reason why wrestling, I think, is a good lens through which to look at our culture, because McMahon, like, his rise is concurrent with Trump's. He's basically the same fucking person in a lot of ways. As far as like their dads were in the business, they bought their dad's business, or you know, they went into their dad's business more or less, and then they became these sort of like media corporate. McMahon taking WWE public, billion-dollar company. His journey is like this finance, Wall Street, New York in the 80s, yuppie, power suit, greed is good. You know, he doesn't provide health insurance to his employees. I mean, maybe they do now, I'm not sure. But like, look at the way he treats his employees, his performers, in the way that, I don't know. It's kind of the story of America over the last 40 years. The story of the WWF. I mean, what was interesting after they went public, I guess, and I haven't watched it in years and years and years, but now apparently they don't, it's very PG. They don't even have like blood on it. And, you know, in the 90s, it was all about pushing the boundaries and shit. I think he, you know, like how he stepped down, right? Recently, Vince McMahon retired because of he paid hush money to women he slept with, just like Trump. Exact same thing, the Stormy Daniels thing. So that's why he stepped down, because he didn't want his company to lose shareholder value, and he didn't want to lose a bunch of stock value by he knew that if he stayed on the stock would tank, and it would cost him his billionaire status. So he stepped down. Now he's still a billionaire. But it's like a corporation of wrestling. It's the Walmart of wrestling. It just swallowed up any kind of alternative business for the most part. And that's not really competition. The territories, you see the style of wrestling change, right? in the WWF in the early 80s, before, I mean, McMahon is an announcer, which I think is interesting. He's on TV, but he doesn't own it. He's not booking it. His dad is still in control. And then what you see, Hulk Hogan comes in, the characters become fucking cartoon characters. Everybody gets fucking huge. You can tell that that was like Vince McMahon Jr.'s thing, is the steroid thing. I mean, everybody is so roided out during the 80s WWF. And they made a lot of fucking money by, like, blowing their product up, but, like, I think they did change the nature of wrestling. And I think, okay, like, somebody like Shawn Michaels, I've been thinking about, is sort of like maybe the ideal worker who's sort of between the two eras, where it's like he kind of knows enough about the old style that he can sort of grapple a little bit. You know, he'll do a fucking pile driver. You know, he knows suplexes. He knows the ropes. But he's also aerial. He does moonsaults and shit. He does that elbow drop. Like, he's not Jeff Hardy, but, like, you know, his ladder match versus Razor Ramon at WrestleMania 10 set the fucking template for all of that shit. And, you know, he started in the 80s. He wasn't fucking huge like Hogan on all those guys. After those guys ate it in the steroid scandal of the early 90s, McMahon had to change the body type, obviously, of the wrestlers. So he phased out the huge fucking 80s dudes who were all greased up and roided out, and brought in Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, who were smaller guys. 220, 230, not 280 or 330 or whatever. But the wrestling became more aerial. It just became, there just became way more action. Just like everything in the culture, everything sped up. You know, it's not a coincidence that WWF really launched its kind of rock and wrestling Hulk era on MTV. It became cool. It became fast. It became pop culture. It became, you know, I think they learned from comic books and shit that if they were able to create characters that are sort of like cartoonish, the merchandising, the branding, and also just like the iconic status in people's minds, you know, things like the Undertaker. I don't know. Our culture has become obsessed with shit like that. Like toys, you know, Marvel characters. It wants to be able to reduce everything to fucking cartoons and primary kind of like color statements. Wrestling wasn't, you know, Ric Flair is not really a character like that. He's kind of a more, I don't know if I'd say complex, but he's more of, he wasn't just like a caricature aimed at like children or something, like the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase or something. One of the things, I was listening to this Dusty Rhodes shoot interview. His story is kind of interesting. His sort of behind the scenes hand in shaping a lot of the modern wrestling culture, I wasn't really privy to, but he booked a lot of shit and he was responsible. Like, he created the Great American Bash and a lot of the WCW pay-per-views, super cards. Dusty Rhodes, like, developed a lot of that kind of shit. And he was talking about how he he called his pay-per-views movies, and he thought of the matches as like movies, which I thought was very interesting. He was like, my movies. You know, I wanted the matches to look like movies. And I do think that that is something that changed about it. Wrestling went from being in black and white and being like more. I mean, it was always on TV, but it was like kind of static in a way. It was all like sleeper holds and kind of like, you know, there were long stretches. It's like the perfect thing to put on TV like Saturday afternoon when nothing's going on, because it had this kind of like droning kind of like pace to it. This kind of flat line, like slow, you know, almost like a fucking soap opera or something. Just like the pace of it was just like. But then once again, the 80s, MTV, cable, WWF, pay per view, the product became more dynamic, color, you know, these bigger characters, these loud, you know, the this is one thing McMahon is very. One of the things that separates him is that he reinvests his resources to get like the absolute best like technology and like branding. You know, the packaging, the cameras they use, the pyro, you know, the Titantron, they're always updating that shit. The videos, the theme songs, they take a lot of work to like make their branding really strong. They always have. The graphic design for the pay-per-views and shit, and that's one reason why their video library I think is so valuable. They, you know, one of the biggest assets, I would say, of the WWE is the content library. I mean, that's what the WWE network is, right? And McMahon has always known that. Selling tapes, right? Before the internet, it was like you had to buy individual tapes and DVDs of shit, of the individual pay-per-views, but you could get them, right? 30 or 40 or 50 bucks or whatever, you'd have a tape of In Your House 96 or whatever, or fucking Royal Rumble 92. Now it's all on the WWE network, so you just subscribe. It's Netflix, right? But it's a content library, you know? When McMahon bought WCW, he basically bought, you know, all the wrestling footage that matters for the most part that exists in this fucking continent. And that's something that he invests time, energy, resources in that, knowing what it's worth and knowing that it's going to pay for itself, right? Because we have WrestleMania 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, we've got every fucking thing that ever happened, basically, in wrestling on pretty high quality video, at least since the fucking 80s. It's a universe, you know, it really is like an entire, like, fucking fictional universe if you want to go into it like that, you know. And these shoot videos, the behind the scenes lore is like a big part of what just like makes the roots of that and the branches of that just like go on and on and on and on. It's seeming like forever, you know. You can just listen to wrestling stories and fucking read about it. I was reading about this guy Bruiser Brody. These old guys were fucking nuts. They'd beat the shit out of each other, you know. They were nuts. And this guy, it's a crazy fucking story. He got killed in Puerto Rico. He got knifed backstage. It's a sad story. Wrestling is fucking it's interesting how it's followed the culture, because it used to be this really seedy business. Just like, you know, the 70s in New York was porn and whatever, crime. The wrestling business was like, you know, Ric Flair was talking about Bobby Heenan could incite a riot. The crowd hated him so much, he would incite a riot. People would be shooting guns off in the arena, he said. You know, the heels, people would attack them and shit. They you know, who was it? Superstar Billy Graham or Blassie or somebody was talking about they trashed his car. He had some brand new fucking car. He came out of the arena and the fans had just like completely destroyed it because they hated him so much. I mean, he took that as a badge of accomplishment, but now it's very PG, it's safe, it's this big corporate arena thing. And I don't know. I don't really follow it. I watch the older stuff, I guess. I don't know. The wrestlers' body types have changed. I watch some of these NXT matches and shit. Trying to, because NXT is supposed to be pretty good. And it's okay, but like, I don't know. None of these guys, they all have this huge facial hair and gross beards and shit. It's like, I don't want to watch this. They all have like very like frog-like bodies, but like huge beards and shit. And they're all kind of like post CM Punk ish. I'm just not interested, you know. Like, I do think the wrestlers need like a little bit of like thickness. Like, part of what makes like that Japanese, like New Japan or All Japan Wrestling so good is like, and this is a hallmark of like old style wrestling too in the United States, like NWA wrestling is like there's just like more of like a thickness to like the hitting. It's not, they're not like hitting harder. It's just like it's like a little slower and like there's like more of like a meaty kind of like he beefed them to like the cells and the moves and stuff. Whereas like American wrestling now, it feels very like firecrackers and very light and very like, I mean, it's very acrobatic. It looks more like circus tumbling or something in a lot of ways. And to be honest, like, I just don't buy that aerial maneuvers are that effective. That's the truth. Is like, when I was a kid, I loved aerial maneuvers. But like, I just don't think that they're not going to actually hurt. They're going to hurt the person doing it way more than they're going to hurt the person they're landing on. Like, I think a certain amount of aerial maneuver is tasteful. Like I said, like a Shawn Michaels. And like luchadors are incredible. Don't get me wrong. Like what they do is completely art. And like I have mad respect for like the Japanese and all the light heavyweights who do crazy aerial shit. And I love aerial shit. You know, when Brock Lesnar does a fucking shooting star press, like, wow. But like, I like a Lance Storm approach to aerial a little bit. Like, do some spinning heel kicks, but I don't know. Do you need to do a 450 splash? It's cool that certain guys do it, but I don't want to see some generic guy with a bunch of tattoos and wrist tape in a Speedo who's like super cut but weighs 195 pounds do a bunch of like aerial shit. That's just not that exciting to me, actually. I'm with Cornette on that one. I'm old school. I'd rather see Barry Windham. No, I wouldn't. I would not rather see Barry Windham. I'd rather see, well, maybe I'd rather see, you know, I gotta say that the Sergeant Slaughter Pat Patterson match was pretty interesting. It was like a hardcore match. Uh, it was like when WWF had the Hardcore Championship in the 90s. It felt like one of those matches. They were hitting each other with brass knuckles. Sergeant Slaughter cut his forehead on the turnbuckle. When I was a kid, he was actually one of my favorites. I had a Sergeant Slaughter G.I. Joe toy because he was also on G.I. Joe somehow. He was like a crossover. See, this is what I mean. This was Reagan era. They were trying to get into children's heads in a way that was kind of insidious. Not kind of. Let's get Sergeant Slaughter on the Army propaganda cartoon. So we get the wrestling, and then let's fill the wrestling with tons of racist, like, caricatures. Hulk Hogan's going to beat the shit out of, like, this Arab guy. It's going to be an arch nemesis. The Iron Sheik. Well, is he Arab or is he, like, who the fuck cares? Just beat... He's from New Jersey. He's clearly an Arab. Beat the fuck out of him, Hulk. That's the American... That's the reptile brain that wrestling is appealing to. I think you could do a really artistic wrestling, though. You could do a really beautiful, like... that's what we were trying to do, beat the shit out of the Trumpers. Like hip, liberal, progressive, woke wrestling. The Woke Wrestling Federation. Social Justice Warrior Wrestling Federation. Well, that was an idea we had in BBW. I don't know if we could call it BBW anymore. That might not fly, but we were going to have a character called the Social Justice Warrior. That was one of Eric's ideas to make fun of the woke culture. And I just would not do that, okay? I didn't think that they were the people that needed to be made fun of. Speaking of movies, I watched The King of Comedy. Should I segue into something else? I mean, I could talk about wrestling all fucking day. I don't even know why. I've been wasting so much time. It's like terrifying to me that the last 3 days of my life I spent literally not doing anything. I had turkey yesterday, actually. I went to the grocery store to just see what I could possibly eat. And they had this delightful little Thanksgiving sampler plate for $11. Not the biggest ripoff of my life. It had some nice turkey with gravy. I had some little like maple syrup sweet potato thing whipped. Some nice kind of medallion potatoes with like some spices, some basil and thyme and shit. There was a little bit of cranberry in there, So the last 2 Thanksgivings, I've eaten turkey from, like, a Manhattan grocery store. And, they were pretty fucking good. I mean, even though I was sick I felt like it wasn't even Thanksgiving. I mean, I was literally feverish, listening to Ric Flair, spit chewing tobacco into a plastic bottle for like 12 hours. The room is sweating, hallucinating. I wish I could do it again. It was so great. I wish I could. Maybe I'll just do that for the next month. It feels so good to just like take a nice break and not do any goddamn thing. I got a gig tonight, doing the open mic tomorrow night. That's the other thing. It's like I needed a rest to just get well. The weather was pretty nice yesterday. I always feel crappy about missing a nice day and I wanted to do some performances. So I watched King of Comedy. I listened to commentary tracks for Stranger Than Paradise, Jim Jarmusch, Taxi Driver, with with Scorsese and Paul Schrader. I listened to part of the commentary track for Gangs of New York. I kind of fell asleep. Uh, what the fuck else did I watch? Movies, right? I don't know. Movies have just been kind of in the air for some reason the past few days. That maybe that's the message of the sickness. Film. Turn your attention to film. Well, my friend Ashley is super into film stuff. She's always like mentioning films and so that's probably one reason why. I mean, I'm a filmmaker and I mean, I really want to make a film in Manhattan. And I have, but I want to make like a scripted thing. Uh my thoughts on King of Comedy are similar to like what I felt. I watched that movie in high school. I got the DVD from Best Buy, and it was one of my favorite movies. Even though it's sort of like low key for a Scorsese. Like I mean the man just has such monumental achievements. And I do got to say, I mean Scorsese was like a big deal for me in high school and in college. Like, I mean, I think over the past few years I've kind of like been not like trying to flag fly as much as I used to because it felt like I don't know. It felt like maybe not as sophisticated because it's like genre stuff. It's not genre, but it's like his movies are very popular, and like they are kind of like, in the way that like The Sopranos is or Tarantino is. It's like they're popular because they're kind of violent and like play into these genre things that are like, like wrestling or something. It's like they're kind of base and they're kind of like, well, I don't know. I mean, that's ridiculous because now that I'm looking at these Scorsese things and like listen to these commentary tracks with him, it's like, like the dude he's lived an incredible life for one thing. Like, I think he said he was in Paris during May '68. He said he saw a double feature of Mississippi Mermaid and Marnie right before May '68 in Paris. And he was at Woodstock and all this shit. But like, okay. Also, things about his film. It's almost like rock and roll shit, where it's like, it's so boomerish. Like the music he uses in his movies and shit, like "Gimme Shelter" and all that. It feels like because it's such a part of our culture, it feels like so hackneyed to some degree at this point. Like, oh wow, Martin Scorsese used "Be My Baby" and "Mean Streets." Like, who gives a fuck? That's such like everybody does that now. But it's like, well, but he invented it kind of, or he was like one of the first people to do that, and like he's been doing it since like the fucking '60s. Like, he's like those rock stars and shit. It's like they've been doing it so goddamn long that they're like Van Morrison. A lot of Van Morrison shit. It's like I can't even listen to this. Like Brown Eyed Girl. Who can possibly listen to this fucking song at this point? But does that make Brown Eyed Girl like a worse song? Like, I mean, no, not necessarily. If you're able to like approach it as if it's something for the first time, like, fucking Scorsese made goddamn Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, fucking Last Temptation of Christ, Goodfellas. Like, Jesus Christ, these are all Taxi Driver is a fucking masterpiece. That's very different than Raging Bull, which is a fucking masterpiece, which is very different than Goodfellas, which is a masterpiece. It's like, and After Hours, fucking, he has all these other kind of like films that are like just as good in their own way, but they're maybe not as, they're maybe not as big of like statements or something, like a movie like Taxi Driver or Raging Bull is like, those are pretty profound, tableaus. Something like King of Comedy or After Hours or Cape Fear, or any number of things. He's got all these documentaries. He's got the concert movies, right? Last Waltz is a fucking classic that everybody fucking watches every Thanksgiving, right? That's a fucking Martin Scorsese movie, right? Uh, it's one of those things that's become almost like cliched because it's like a part of our fucking religion or something, you know? Goodfellas. It's like, what is this? He said something about Godard said successful films become commercial for all the wrong reasons or something. Or commercial films become successful for the wrong reasons or something like that. And it's like I think that's kind of true. Like something like Goodfellas, right? Is like a masterpiece artistically and like a really amazing film aesthetically, stylistically, and unique. It's not like Taxi Driver. It's not like Raging Bullet. It's like a montage. The whole fucking movie is just like a montage. It's like a music video, right? Everything's fast and whereas like Raging Bull is elegiac and black and white and slow motion and things it's more romantic to some degree. It's kind of more sublime to some degree. uh Henry Hill romanticizes his life in a different way. It's all about kicks and thrills, whereas like Raging Bull is more this kind of like tragedy, this stoic kind of masculinity or whatever, envy, psychotic violence. uh Violence is a big part of Scorsese. Bringing Out the Dead, that's a really interesting movie. I haven't seen all of it, but like, it's a companion piece to Taxi Driver almost. Um, Age of Innocence, for Christ's sake. Like another New York movie showing it from a very different point of view. I mean, Gangs in New York is one of my favorite fucking. I love Gangs in New York. I think it's a spectacular fucking movie. And Scorsese is so goddamn smart about movies. He knows everything. And so he knows what he wants and he knows what he's layering in. He wants this kind of historical epic, but he wants it to have this kind of like D.W. Griffith feel or some shit. Like, he wants it to be like The Robe or something. I don't even know. The Technicolor. I went 3-strip Technicolor. Uh, The Departed. I hate to say it because The Departed is kind of like, I don't know. It's almost like a made to order piece almost. It's a cop movie, which like, most of Scorsese's movies are like gangster movies, at least the ones kind of in that world. So to have kind of the corrupt cop, the Boston thing, it's kind of an interesting counterpoint. Then he's got all, the fucking Howard Hughes movie, The Aviator. Like he's just got tons and tons and tons of shit. I haven't even seen a lot of that shit. Shutter Island. I didn't see The Irishman. I thought the Rolling Thunder movie was kind of lame, to be honest. But anyway, King of Comedy, it does fit with kind of After Hours, and it's kind of a companion piece to Taxi Driver. It's kind of a similar loner, that early Reagan era, the guy who shot, John Lennon got shot.
Reagan got shot. Uh, Even though that script, I guess, had been written in the 70s, it had been written kind of in the early 70s. Uh, when I was in high school, movies about stand up comedy were appealing because there weren't that many of them. It wasn't, it, I'm just becoming aware that this culture has gone through some kind of like huge stand up comedy like boom over the last like 10, 15 years with podcasts, you know, Instagram, all this, YouTube. Stand up comedy is really just going to open up Netflix, pumping tons of money into it. uh, in the 90s, there was Comedy Central and Seinfeld and shit like that, but, stand up comedy movies, it's like there was Punchline and there was King of Comedy. I mean, there were things like Larry Sanders, but we didn't have HBO really. King of Comedy, I hate to say it, is like very relatable. And I think it, like he doesn't he say something in the movie about how all he ever wanted was to be in show business. It's like I definitely related to that as a kid. And his whole thing where he's like recording his act and he's writing his jokes and he doesn't really know how to approach being. The weird thing about it is like why doesn't he do comedy in clubs, right? They never really even venture into that. The lady sort of suggests it to him, right? Like, start working in clubs, we'll come and see you. And he's just like, nah, he just wants to be on TV. You know? Does he even give a fuck about comedy? Like, there's not a scene in the movie that takes place in a comedy club. He's not hanging out with other comedians. He's hanging out with Sandra Bernhard and these other celebrity obsessives. In a certain way, the movie is about celebrity. I mean, I guess that's general, but like, uh, that was one of the things that like maybe it's just because of when I was born, but I definitely feel like I grew up saturated with celebrity culture and was obsessed with it. In the 90s, all that stuff was like firing on all cylinders, like big movie premieres, magazine covers, like blockbusters, like these celebs, Tom Cruise. It just felt like, whoa, these people are like, they managed to make themselves significant somehow. They must have talent, or they were chosen by the gods, or but also I don't know. I was born into show business. I've always wanted to be in show business. I've always been in show business, and when I was a child, I was writing skits and doing skits and imitating Saturday Night Live. And, in seventh grade, I wanted to be a fucking stand up comedian. I wanted to be Jim Carrey, you know? Desperately. More than anything. I wanted to be Jim Carrey. Uh, and there were other people who I liked. George Carlin, Kevin Meaney. I mean, we watched, from 1995 to, 2002 or something. Basically, all I did was watch Comedy Central. I remember seeing Mark Maron as the host of Short Attention Span Theater. That was like in the early 90s. Comedy Central was like such a huge force in our culture, but then Adult Swim became kind of like the hipper comedy thing. Comedy Central never really had Adult Swim style shows. Uh, it wasn't really avant garde. The closest thing to that maybe was like Dr. Katz, or I guess maybe South Park. Uh, it was more kind of like comedy clubs. It felt like Comedy Central was like taking you inside comedy clubs. It was like you'd see Jeff Ross, you'd see Todd Barry, Dave Attell. Uh, really not that different than spoken word poetry. They could have been doing the same shit on the other side of town in the Bowery Poetry Club or New Yorican, and they kind of tried and it didn't really work, I guess. But like, it's just curious to me that comedy is like such a powerful cultural platform because it's kind of underdeveloped in a way. I feel like poetry, you have to think about exactly. It's just nailed down more precisely, and it's more expressive to some degree. Uh, and then they would show movies and shit. It would be like National Lampoon Vacation, constantly, Ferris Bueller, a lot of John Candy stuff. Once Upon a Crime, Delirious. uh, I've seen every episode of SNL from 1980 to 1995. The golden years, the golden era, the greatest era. And so, like, King of Comedy, for for a Scorsese movie, you can tell it's fast. They made it faster. Maybe it's not, like Taxi Driver kind of touches on deeper stuff. It's maybe more layered. Taxi Driver has got a lot of different layers to it. It's got political kind of things. It's got, you know, urban alienation kind of themes. It's got the Taxi Driver thing is kind of a metaphor for isolation, loneliness. It's got literary kind of, this Notes from Underground thing kind of built into it. It's got a love story. It's got all these different plot lines. King of Comedy pretty much just does one thing the whole time. Rupert Pupkin is obsessed with Jerry Langford, and he basically wants to be Jerry Langford. I guess is essentially he's gonna kind of get revenge on everybody who made fun of him in high school, everybody who thought he was a loser, the girls who didn't like him, through fame, right? He's going to become famous. With comedy at that time, especially, right? The idea was you could go on the Tonight Show, and if Johnny Carson liked you, you're a star overnight. That was like the equivalent of going viral, I would say. As if Johnny Carson liked you. Johnny Carson did this, you went viral. And you had a fucking sitcom the next day. That's sort of what King of Comedy is about. That sort of launch and that sort of like overnight success, waving a wand over your life. And the sort of fantasy of that, but also the reality of what the celebrity. I mean, if you look at Jerry Lewis in the movie, right? And I think he's incredible in the movie because he's able to do his kind of Jerry Lewis takes a little, but then you can tell his reaction to the way that people say things to him on the street, or the celebrity aspect of it, the way the mob treats him. When the lady on the street says, can you say hello to my husband on the phone, and he says, sorry, I'm in a hurry, and she goes, you should get cancer. Like, he's able to react to that stuff so well because I think he's lived it, obviously. And there's just like this kind of like stoicism, and this kind of like he just kind of bears it or something in the movie. You can tell he's really not happy, like the way that look on his face at the end of the movie when he sees Rupert Pupkin on all the screens. He looks pissed. And I've been thinking about that moment. What does that moment mean? Because the message of the movie it is almost like Taxi Driver, where it's kind of this like cynical, satirical, ironic thing. Right? In Taxi Driver, he's celebrated as a hero, even though he easily could have gone the other way and killed the politician, and they would have thought he was, and the media would have. So it's like a commentary kind of on the media or something. King of Comedy, it's kind of the same ending. He gets rewarded for this insane stunt, and this kind of, and like, I mean, is that not inaccurate? I mean, in a certain way, what Rupert Pupkin is doing is not different than what a mass shooter is doing. In fact, you could say that King of Comedy is a movie about a mass shooter in a certain way. It's the same kind of personality, or at least, I don't know, it feels like they're doing it for the same reasons. They're doing it to get famous, to give their life significance because they're desperate. I mean, obviously, Rupert Pupkin isn't a mass shooter, but I'm saying that kind of loner alienation, sense of meaninglessness, obsession with fame. A mass shooting is a way to get people to talk about you, look at you. I mean, now it's become a little bit more commonplace. But I don't know what it is about American society. I guess maybe it's because just like media machines are such a part of our lives, starting with like radio and television, especially. These sort of like more verisimilitude forms where like they can literally bring your personality and your charisma into a home. It seems like the media and that kind of celebrity culture has taken. I mean, when I was a kid, I thought that's all there was. I thought just like besides movies and music, like what else is there? Like who even gives a fuck about anything else? But, in the 1850s or whatever, or the 1750s, or the 1450s, it's like what media did they have? They had maybe like theaters they went to. They had to go if you wanted to hear music, you either had to fucking play it yourself or like go listen to somebody play it. It's like there was no mechanical reproduction. And so fame, I feel like, was not as easily like imperialistic or like reproduced. Now it's like if you have a fucking YouTube video that works, theoretically everybody on the planet with a phone could watch it. Or there's probably a few billion people that could potentially watch it. Some of these fucking streaming, some of these songs have got over 1 billion plays and shit. Like, our lives are kind of dominated by media. And now that we all have, like, smartphones, we basically are media production studios like everywhere we go. You know, we are filmmakers, you know, on an unprecedented scale. You know, it's like everybody's got a little fucking like Nickelodeon that they make films for, and it's their Instagram profile or whatever. And you know, it's interesting how that celebrity culture worship has filtered down into the kind of attention economy in the modern, just like people starving for likes, online validation, views. Has it supplanted IRL? You know, has the media like swallowed us whole? We are the media in a certain way at this point. The media is like everywhere. You know, it's like the media used to be like limited. Only certain people had distribution, only certain people had cameras. You know, I mean, 150 years ago, you couldn't even like share a picture widely. You know, there were newspapers and shit like that, but like you couldn't really get an audience other than like through print of like, you know, thousands and thousands of people. I don't know. I think people just like you know, but I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I mean, creating media is artistic, and everybody should be artistic all the time if that's what they want to do. You know, I think Scorsese will be looked at as one of the like maybe not like founders, but like, you know, he's a relatively early voice in visual storytelling. And I think Scorsese was like one of the first filmmakers that was like thinking cinematically. Like his camera moves and shit like that, like the way it moves with the music, that is something that like has become increasingly a part of everyone's lives. You know, the vernacular of visual like communication, movie storytelling through movies. I think he'll be one of the early kind of like, you know, meaning this is something that's like going to become a language for everybody. Now that everybody has a phone that's basically like vestigial, or maybe I'm not using that word right. Like we more or less can use filmmaking as like a first-hand kind of form of communication. People already are, right? Obviously. You'll film, you know, FaceTime, or you'll film, you know, something you see on the street, post it to your fucking Instagram or fucking, you know, it's just like, but anyway, I don't I don't know how like you would like go back. You know, like our culture is so fame obsessed. this is why I mean, look at the celebrities we have. Machine Gun Kelly, Megan Fox, Kardashian. It's like, what are they famous for? Nobody even knows anymore. Fame is the content, right? Fame is the fucking message. It's they're famous because they're famous, right? And everybody can be famous just because of who they are now. It's like I'll just get on Instagram and like share my life, and I could potentially get famous just for that. Uh, I think it's cool that people are like encouraged, or like uh, it's almost like default that like you have to kind of live your life with some kind of creative expression now, because if you want to share content to Instagram, you're going to have to take pictures or videos, you know? Uh, and so a lot more people have been energized as far as like sharing their art, putting it online, making art. Uh, I think that's good. Does that mean there's more people like Rupert Pupkin who, Rupert Pupkin is just, he's like a guy making music in his basement, you know? He's like a guy with a podcast. That movie, I think people kind of took for granted at how, because it seemed like the things it's calling attention to, it's not that they seem obvious per se, but it's not dramatic like Taxi Driver, where all these people get shot and he's got a mohawk, or Raging Bull, where it's his, boxing thing, or Billy Bats. It's not like that. It's, even though Scorsese, I think, and De Niro both said that Pupkin is actually the kind of scariest of all the characters, there's not really overt violence in the film, right? Nobody gets shot. Nobody gets their head in a vice. A lot of Scorsese's films are violent. This movie is noticeably not violent. But I think he's making a comment about comedy and the violence of that, Um, like I said, it doesn't go deep, and in a certain way it's almost not even a film about a stand-up comedian or stand-up comedy, because like I said, he doesn't perform in clubs, and he doesn't seem interested in doing that or anything. It seems like he wants to be, Joey Bishop or whatever. He wants to be like, he just wants to be like in the Rat Pack. He wants to be like this kind of showbiz legend like Johnny or whatever, but it's like, in that sense, like, I would say it's a convincing portrait of like kind of a lunatic, right? Like Rupert Pupkin, and I think that's, De Niro doesn't like overdo that, but like, that whole movie, he's constantly operating, you know, I want to get the tape to Jerry. Well, I'll wait. He's just a pain in the ass, and he makes people uncomfortable. He forces people to have to like be like, dude, no. And that's like, I feel like that's a very